My mother, Grace Ramsey, is still living. We just celebrated her 103rd birthday. My family business was farming. My dad, he always wanted to and was a grain farmer. We lived on right on the Illinois River, Illinois Chapel, 3 miles east of here. It would have been perfect for beef cattle and there, but not Dad. He loved grain farm, and he actually he ran a custom threshing machine and did his own hay baling and etc. And that's what put me in the retail business. At age 14, I came into Prairie Grove and applied at the IGA grocery store and started working for Ken Marvin, as a matter of fact. And I went from there to the Crescent department store, worked for Elton and Guy Skelton during all of the rest of my high school years and my college years. Oh gosh, we baled hay. I was with my dad when he ran the threshing machine. He'd put me on the tractor, and it was power takeoff driven, and he called me his little engineer. If he needed it sped up, he would say, he would give me this kind of a motion and pull the throttle back, and I did that. I was a water boy, taking water to the hands, but sitting on the back of a case hay baler and eating all that dirt and chaff all day is kind of what put me in the retail business, I think. At age 14, I came in and started my retail career at the grocery store. Ken Marvin was my boss, and he was in a way, he was a great guy, but boy, you had to stay busy. If you weren't doing anything else, you better have a feather duster dusting cans or something. It taught me a great work ethic though. And so I did that, and actually worked for Hubert and Guy Sparks at the old Fairway Grocery for a while. And from there, that's where I left and was asked to join Mr. Skelton, the Skeltons at the Crescent department store. I worked there during high school years and college years, and as part of that, I was paying my own way to college, and I was a projectionist at the Beverly Theater, which is next door. It's where the flea market is now, but the Beverly Theater, I ran the picture show several nights a week. So as part of paying for my education, I went 1 year at the University of Arkansas, and all that was kind of too much, I guess. And I was approached with a buddy about looking into joining the Air Force. So I went with him, and they started talking to me about the aviation cadet program. So I enrolled in the aviation cadet program and was part of that for that was class 55 in, so that was 1955 actually. And I didn't make it all the way through the pilot program. Then I was assigned to 15th Air Force Reconnaissance Technical Squadron, and I was sent to March Field in Riverside, California, and that's where I served out the rest of my Air Force career doing photography, and that's where I learned a little bit about photography, came home and supplemented my college income with photography. I actually did a record. I don't know whether it's a record or not, but I did 6 weddings one weekend, 2 Friday, 2 Saturday, and 2 Sunday. So I was a busy guy back then with photography, which I do very little of today. But that was a huge part of my life back in my college days. And the Crescent was always my favorite job, I think. Like I said, I worked there during my college time, and when I returned from the military, I finished my education and graduated from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, was recruited and went to work for Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. And my first assignment was office manager at the Fayetteville store, which is 40 East Center, right across from the courthouse. And I did that, and I was single. I did that, but I was rooming with a couple of guys that worked at SWEPCO, and they would tease me about being able to take the boat out on weekends, and I was working weekends and nights and etc. So I actually left Goodyear and went with SWEPCO for a period of time, and that's where I met my wife. We worked in the commercial department together at SWEPCO, and Bill Carter from West Fork was my boss, as a matter of fact, and we went to church together at the First Baptist Church in Fayetteville. And one Sunday he held up his hand like this and wanted me to come back for $500 a month. Believe it or not, I went to work for a major company, Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, 1959 graduate, for $500 a month. That, you know, they won't even pay the utilities today, but that was a good wage back then. And I took a pay cut actually to go to SWEPCO. And you know, we were about to have our first child and everything. That extra money, that 500 cent, was very appealing. So I was hired back as a store manager trainee. And about 90 days after that, I found myself in Miami, Oklahoma, as store manager of the Miami, Oklahoma store. And that was a B.F. Goodrich factory town at that time. So that was a tough gig, but we made it happen, primarily selling appliances, and you know, turned that thing into a profitable operation. And I get a call one day from the district office in Kansas City, and when sun sets that evening, I'm pulling into Salina, Kansas. I was assigned to be store manager at the Salina store, and that's where I was when Mr. Skelton contacted me and offered me a partnership in the Crescent department store if I'd come home. And I had kids about, you know, Becky was about to enter school, and Brenda was growing up, and Goodyear was, boy, you never knew where you were going to be. So it was just appealing to me to, you know, settle down one place and come home, as a matter of fact. So I came home in 1967, joined the Crescent department store, and Mr. Skelton and I were partners for like 5 years, and he approached me, ironically, after I had been elected to the House of Representatives. He said, "It's yours. I'm gonna hang it up." And it was one of those, gosh, oh gosh, what I do now moments. But anyway, I was either partner or owner of the Crescent department store for 18 years. And the Crescent was a very successful, as you know, business back in those days. And I'm no Solomon, but I could see the writing on the wall. And Mr. Jim Reese approached me about buying the store, and I'd gotten so busy with legislative stuff that it was attractive. So I sold the store to him, and that was in the late 80s, I guess it was. But it was after 2-3 years after the famous water tower incident at the Crescent store, where the town water tower fell on the business. And I retired from politics, kind of a natural thing to become a lobbyist. So I went to work for several people, the most prominent of which was the AGC of Arkansas General Contractors, and their biggest division was highway contractors. And so I did that for 11 years, and I was approached about the vacancy at the Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce. And I was actually, Fayetteville Chamber of Commerce was one of my clients when I was a lobbyist, and so I was approached about taking that job, and I did. And I was president, CEO of the chamber then for the next 7 to 8 years, almost 8 years, I guess. And decided it was time to retire and slow down a little bit. But I soon found out that I flunked retirement. And I was on the board of Arkansas Good Roads. They needed an executive director, so I took that job. And I did that for 2 years until some health issues forced me to have to step down. So I am now officially 100% retired, even though I flunked retirement 2 or 3 times. I was not there to see it. I was I was actually, it was on Sunday when there was not a lot of activity, and we had a group that usually met for coffee a Sunday morning, and our coffee group, and we went over and went back to the back parking lot and were observing what was going on, and then I left and went to church. And let's see, was it Lee Terry or Finest Smith, anyway, that came and got me out of church and hauled me downtown, and I never will forget this. It was in July, and we had straw hats and hats on display in the front window. There was hats all over the sidewalk and out in the street. I mean, the impact of that blew out the front windows and blew all that merchandise out, and the Crescent was actually 3 levels. You had the main level, you had an upper level, and then you had a basement level, and it came into that upper level, and did a lot of damage. We had a water tower damage sale, I guess, but there wasn't any water in the tower, even though it did a lot of damage. But the first night, the night after that happened, it came one heck of a rain, so we did have some water damage, but not from the water tower itself. But my wife swears to this day that's when my gray hair started, though, and we were able to get it back reconstructed and back in business, and thanks to a lot of help from John Everett, who was my attorney, we were able to work with the insurance company, and a lot of folks thought I came out well on that, but you never come out ahead on something like that. You really don't. But anyway, that was and that thing made national news. I got newspaper clippings from as far away as Alaska, and people talking. So it was an incident, an unusual incident, and very traumatic. And in the census of 1970, they redrew all the legislative districts just like they do every 10 years. And Prairie Grove used to be the Fayetteville representative used to represent Prairie Grove, but new districts were drawn. Prairie Grove was in a district, not all its own, but separate from Fayetteville. And I was approached by, Delford Reef was one, superintendent of schools, several, would you be interested in running for that spot? And I had always had some interest in politics. I never dreamed I'd ever run for office, but I did, and that was 1972, and it was kind of a tough time getting there. We had a primary, then we had a runoff, and then I had an opponent in the general election that year as well. But then I fortunately served the next 16 years unopposed. And in 1988, Jerry Hunton challenged me for that position, and I prevailed. But my intention was to serve that one term and retire, which I did. When I first took the Crescent job and became part of the Crescent, we had an organization called the Trades Day Association. We'd have a drawing every month, and that Trades Day Association kind of was the nearest thing to a Chamber of Commerce. But myself, as long with some other people, we converted the Trades Day Association into the Prairie Grove Chamber of Commerce. And I remember calling Lee Zachary from Fayetteville, Bob Lamb from Little Rock, and they came in and talked to us, and we convinced the leadership in Prairie Grove that we need to have a Chamber of Commerce. So we did. And as part of that, we formed the Prairie Grove Industrial Development Corporation, and we started recruiting industry. And we were lucky enough to get a look from Universal Electric, and we're able to fly to Michigan and talk to those people, and we were awarded that plant. So that was kind of the beginning of the industrial development of Prairie Grove. And success breeds success, and I was approached from what's now Arkansas Galvanizing and about putting a plant. And so we were able to get, I think that was 32 acres or something, just before you get to the Muddy Fork River, just off of. We located Arkansas Galvanizing. We put them in the back lot next to the river, and then Lord, it went from there. Greg Copeland contacted us about moving his injection molding business from Hogeye to Fayetteville, and we were able to get a road into that area with some help from the highway department, and Prairie Grove honored me on that. If you go out there today, you'll see J.W. Bill Ramsey Industrial Park Road. So that's kind of the success. But we actually flew the superintendent of schools, a gentleman from AIDC, Larry Golden, who was editor of the paper at that time, Randall Spear, who was superintendent of schools, J.G. Ward, who was mayor at that time. That was the delegation that went to Michigan and recruited Universal Electric, and we were lucky enough to get them here, and that was kind of the beginning of economic development, or industrial development at least, in Prairie Grove. It was a big deal, particularly somebody. I know Universal Electric and Baldor Electric and all those electric motor manufacturers are no longer here. They moved to Mexico or moved elsewhere. But it was a big deal, and Universal was a great company. Was a great company, and it was Prairie Grove didn't have, the only industry Prairie Grove had was the canning factory. The canning factory, and that was of course very seasonal, but it really provided an economic boost for Prairie Grove at that time, at a time when it was really, really needed. Of course, Andrew Bain and John Bain are the grandsons, but their granddad, Dick Bain, had a station that was just across from the cemetery as you come into Prairie Grove, and that was kind of the place everybody went. You could go and get a knee-high orange, and and that was a big treat. We'd come to town, and Saturdays, many Saturdays, the old Beverly Theater was operating. We had Roy Rogers and Gene Autry and Johnny Mac Brown and all those old movies. So that was a big treat. But it was definitely about the only time we saw Prairie Grove was on Saturdays back then. In 1948, I guess it was the first real consolidation. Those little schools like Illinois Chapel and everything were consolidated, in our case, into Prairie Grove. So I came into Prairie Grove as a freshman, and back then we didn't even have a bus service. I'd ride in the morning with my uncle, who was a mechanic in town, and often walk that 3 miles home after school. Later along, my dad was also a mechanic, so I'd ride home with him. But we didn't have any. Now we later did have, a year or so later, we had a bus service. But in my 9th grade, it was a big jump from Illinois Chapel to Prairie Grove High School, and but it was a great experience. I graduated in 1951, as a matter of fact, from high school. So it's not very many of my old classmates still around. We had a reunion until recently, but Prairie Grove currently has a all-class reunion every other year. So I always participate in that, and these days I'm finding I'm one of the older members of the class. But it's always nice to see old friends, and Prairie Grove has been great to me. Prairie Grove is home and always will be home. At Illinois Chapel, there used to be the schoolhouse and the church house. They're both located, and it was just maybe a couple of city blocks from where we lived. the farm, so I walked to school. You know, I was next door to, just down the road actually. I remember the Battlefield Park from high school days. It was not developed. Mr. Fred McChristian was kind of the catalyst on getting something done. We used to, as teenagers, we used to go up to the Battlefield Park and drive our cars around and spin around some of the trees and everything. I mean, there wasn't anything there really. Now the bandstand was there, but the bandstand that's still there was about the only structure in the whole park. You know, the Cane Hill Tower was not there, the ladder barn, none of that. And I give Dr. Fred McChristian credit for getting something going there, and then the Parkses got active in that, and it was accepted into the state park system, and that was the kind of the beginning of the revitalization of the Prairie Grove Battlefield Park. And of course, you know, it's a big deal every Labor Day, the Clothesline Fair and the Labor Day celebration. And I actually was in charge of entertainment for 25 years before moving to Fayetteville. We arranged the square dancing, arranged all the music activity and all that. The Lions Club, and I was a part of the Lions Club, of course, but the Lions Club did all of that. And used to cook chickens out in the open and everything. I don't think they do that anymore. But anyway, it's a big deal. And it started, I think it actually started where the tennis courts are today in Prairie Grove. They started a Labor Day celebration there, and with a little bit of square dancing and music, and then when the park started being revitalized, everything moved to the park, and that thing really took off. Both my daughters and even my granddaughters participated over the years in square dancing in that, and actually I was. As a legislator, was asked to, why can't we have a place where we can square dance, and that the structure where the square dancing takes place, I was able to get an appropriation and get that built. I didn't at the time agree with where it was built, but you know, we ran into a lot of opposition from historic preservation group and everything, and we built it down in an area. I would rather have been up a little closer to the park, a little bit more, but turned out well. But and I remember my early days at the Crescent, hearing that whistle go off at noon from the canning factory, and that's when they'd take a lunch break. But that used to be a major operation, and really the only real industry that Prairie Grove had. Now Prairie Grove was at one time, as I understand, even before my time, was you know, the railroad came through, and it was pretty much the center, and the Southern Mercantile, the building is still there, but the Southern at one time had everything from, you know, you could go buy a wagon, you could, you know, had an undertaker and dry goods and groceries and everything. It was really and truly quite, at that time, a real going operation. I think Prairie Grove is and always has been a very friendly place. It's a very safe place. When I was growing up, nobody even locked their doors. I mean, it was just a safe and secure neighborhood. I'm sure that's changed somewhat, but it's just it was a real close-knit community and a real hub of economic activity early on. When the railroad left, it took a lot away from Prairie Grove. I mean, Prairie Grove kind of suffered after that, but Prairie Grove at one time was a real center of commerce in Washington County.